What's up, guys? Mitchell Bouchard here, your host at Red Cape Learning. I just want to share with you guys one quick announcement, and I just want to tell you guys that we just picked up the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, and we're filming with it right now. I just want to say that this camera has been phenomenal so far. We've got an entire review that I'm working on right now, so I'm trying to whip out, the dolly and get all the slider shots, and I want to do a very in-depth, comprehensive review for you guys after using the camera for about 2 or 3 months. Anyhow, on this episode, I want to take an excerpt from one of our courses, and what I'm going to talk about is the differences between prime lenses and zoom lenses. Let's get right to it. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe below if you haven't already. There are 3 main lens types that you have to familiarize yourself with. Those are prime lenses, zoom lenses, and cinema lenses. Now, the first lens we're going to talk about is a prime lens. Now, I've got one right over here. I use older glass, and that's just one way in which I can kind of separate myself from this overwhelming digital age, which I talked about earlier. And older lenses are very interesting too because they generally have a better aperture. This lens in particular goes to an f2.8, so it's really easy to get extreme shallow depth of field. I've used this on several of my projects, and it never seems to fail. Even wide open, they are extremely sharp. So what are the pros and the cons of prime lenses? Well, let's start with the cons. One of the main downsides to a prime lens is that you can't zoom with it. So it's a fixed focal length. What that means is that you can't zoom in or out with the lens. So this is an 85mm contact Zeiss lens. It's from the 80s. When filming with this lens, you're not going to be able to zoom in and out. You're going to be stuck at this focal length. But if you purchased a whole set, then you can cover most of your focal length range. And over time, you're going to know which lenses you like the most. So for me, my favorite lens is a 28mm, and that's what we're shooting on right now. That's a 28mm Distagon contact Zeiss lens, and it's also an f2.8, but we're closed down right now. And these lenses are just phenomenal, like I said before. One of the other downsides to prime lenses is that they are extremely expensive, especially if you want to get a whole set and cover a wide range. You are buying them individually, and you're spending, anywhere from, at least generally, if you're getting a good lens, $400 to, $5,000 per prime lens. Now let's talk about the pros to using prime lenses. Now, after a while, when you start shooting video, you will want to maybe purchase a prime lens because you've found out which focal length you like the most. I love a 28mm lens on a super 35mm sensor. And I love this because I get just a little bit of that fisheye kind of look, but it holds strong and I can bring the camera in or out. It depends on your style of filmmaking, but for me, it's really important to get to know your lens. The sharpness that you get while using a prime lens is generally going to be much sharper than using a zoom lens as well. Prime lenses are built to really perform well at that particular focal length. That's the way they're designed and engineered, and there's just a lot of plus sides to it. Another thing is that they're a little more compact, so they can fit into bags much easier, and they're very intuitive that way. I have also noticed that when you get a prime lens, the aperture is much greater as well. So instead of being stuck at, say, an f4, you're gonna have, instead of being stuck at, say, an f4 with a lot of zoom lenses, it's really easy to find a prime lens that can open up the aperture at least to an f2.8, which is just like this contact Zeiss lens. Prime lenses can be found anywhere on eBay as well, and I'm also gonna put links to cheap prime lenses, which we'll talk about even more in depth just here in a minute as well. All right, so the next lens I want to talk about is the zoom lens. Now I'm going to take the lens hood off here. So this is my Canon 24-70 f4 IS USM macro lens, and I know it's a lot, but basically what this is a beast of a zoom lens. It covers everything from your wide shot to your close-up. Not an extreme close-up, not an extreme fisheye or crazy wide shot, but when you're filming a documentary or a wedding or even a corporate gig, you're really able to shoot in sequences with this lens. So what are the pros and cons to using a zoom lens? Let's start with the cons. Now, one of the downsides to using a zoom lens is that if you're not going to pay a lot of money, the quality of your lens isn't going to be as great. This is a more expensive zoom lens. This is an L series lens that I got in the US, and it's quite good, but it does have some issues because there's a lot of glass in here. When you put more glass into a lens, it's just really hard to get a sharp image, and it's really hard to outperform a prime lens at the same focal length when utilizing a zoom lens. This is what's known as IS, which is image stabilization. And this is pretty important to think about when using a zoom lens and you may not have a tripod or you just want to be able to get that smooth kind of footage. And it's really important to have an IS lens, especially when you're at 70 millimeters. When you're on a wider shot, it generally doesn't show as much. So it's something to think about, but I usually stick with the IS on this lens for most of the type of shooting that I do with it. One of the worst things about zoom lenses potentially is that you may not have a constant aperture. So if I'm filming something and I want to zoom in and out, sometimes the aperture will change. It will close and open as I'm zooming. And what that's going to do is change my exposure. And you don't want that during a shot. So if you're doing even a little zoom, you're going to darken your image and your exposure is going to change. Now this is a constant f4 and I don't have that issue, but you do have to pay for it, and it's something to keep in mind. Always look for a constant aperture. Again, unless you're paying a lot of money, you're also not going to have extreme depth of field. This lens can open up to an f4, which is okay, but if you do want that extreme blurry background, especially when filming with micro four thirds sensors, which are pretty small, it's really hard to get a lot of depth of field with the lens like this. Now the pros to using a zoom lens, there are quite a few. In general, I would rather you guys buy a lens like this instead of trying to buy a whole set of prime lenses. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, when you use something like a 24-70, you really get to understand your focal lengths and what they're doing to your image. And the best way to know is to test them all out. I would grab a lens like this, shoot at 24 millimeter, shoot at like 26, and just go up in stages. It's really nice to be able to pick up a lens like this, and you can film all day with it without changing lenses. One of the pros to utilizing a zoom lens is that most of the time you're gonna have a nice heavy lens. And what that's gonna do is add a little more weight to your camera, and it's gonna allow you to support the sensor more. Usually most DSLRs are pretty lightweight, and it's really hard to support that sensor inside the camera. But yeah, it's extremely important to be able to support the sensor, because when doing so, you are able to lock that camera down and you're not getting that shaky kind of home video look. Try to get at least a 24-70, if not like an 18-55. And yeah, you do also have a nice heavy beast of a lens, and it's all compact and you're not switching lenses on and off all the time. The other lens I want to talk about are cinema lenses. Now, these are very expensive, but they are built for video. This is a mini prime lens, and we're going to talk about it in just a second when I talk about how to modify your own. Now, this is a Vajra lens. This is for a micro four thirds camera, so it's kind of small, and this is just a beautiful lens. This is essentially a prime lens, but it's not a photography lens. And most of the time when you're shooting on a DSLR, now when shooting with a DSLR, you're most likely gonna have numbers on it is a little bit different. Now the main differences are the numbers and the smoothness. Now this lens, which is my older lens, it's really nice. I got it because this is more of a old school lens and it's just got buttery smooth focusing. However, this lens here, this Vedra Cinema Prime, is unbelievable. It doesn't click as well. It's one thing we'll talk about a little bit later too. It is completely de-click. So as you're coming in and out of a room that's got different exposure, you can open and close your aperture. And there's no clicks. You just have total control over your image. Now let's talk about the pros and cons. Cons has to be price. Most cinema lenses like this, they're just rehoused and they just have better, smoother focusing rings, which is great, but they're just really expensive. And if you're getting a whole set of these, it's way more than getting a whole set of, your more generic photo style lenses. And it can just be very expensive and it's hard to get a whole set. Now this is a micro four thirds cinema lens, and these are much cheaper than the full frame ones you get from Canon or Zeiss. Those ones range anywhere from at least $2,000 to $5,000. I'm pretty sure that the Xene ones are the cheapest, and even those aren't that cheap either. Other than it being expensive, I don't really have anything negative to say about these. These are designed for video use. If you have the budget or you can rent lenses, try to get cinema lenses. They also have cinema zooms, but those are just ridiculously expensive. And for the fundamentals of filmmaking, we're not going to worry about it too much. So what are the pros to cinema glass? Well, as you can see, the build quality. The build quality is phenomenal. This is heavy duty, all metal. It is like 3 times heavier than this lens. So build quality does go a long way, and when utilizing this lens, you're going to support the sensor again, and it's just going to take you to that next level. Another pro is that you do have T-stops. Now instead of f-stops, this is a T-stop, and now T-stops is the measurement of light hitting the sensor and not the measure of light coming through the aperture. So as I open and close the aperture, there's different T-stops that you could read here. So right now it's at an f2.2, which is completely wide open. Now T-stops is the measurement of light hitting the sensor, not the measurement of light coming through. So it's a little more accurate, and it has a tendency of being a little bit brighter than the f-stops that you will see on most photo lenses. Another pro to cinema lenses is the fact that the focusing ring is silky smooth. This contact Zeiss one is very good, but this one is just unbelievable, and the increments are so small. It's buttery smooth, and yeah, you have that, and along with the sharpness, these cinema lenses are your best choice. Just very, very expensive. So I hope this helps you guys out when choosing a lens. We have the cinema lens, zoom lens, and prime lens, and they all have a place in the world of DSLR filmmaking. I'll see you guys in the next section. We're gonna talk about how to get budget glass and how to modify a old lens like this to throw onto your camera for cinematic purposes. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Next time you go out filming, think about getting as much depth of field as possible. And that's gonna mean you trying to use prime lenses. If you're not comfortable with it, I promise you, go out and practice. And the other alternative too is you can use a friend's or rent lenses as well. And that will give you the opportunity to not only understand focal lengths, but be able to really tap into sharp footage and understand what these kind of lenses are doing to your image. Don't forget, guys, we've got links in the description below to the entire course from the excerpt you just watched. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, and always sport sensor and take off your lens cap.